Immediately following this event, we have an opportunity for an informal way that you can get to know our speakers. So keep an eye out on the chat box and we'll share a QR code a little bit later on. But before we meet our representatives from our collaborative partners, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our outgoing 9th U.S. Youth Observer to the UN, Dustin Liu, who is going to take a moment to reflect upon his year as Youth Observer and to share with us what he has learned about what we're calling the activist generations and really their relationship with the US and with the UN. So it is my pleasure to welcome Dustin to the stage and to also take this opportunity to formally say an incredibly heartfelt thank you for all that you've done, Dustin, in your role. And I think Dustin had told me at last count, he had participated as a representative, as an ambassador of UNA USA Youth at more than 280 speaking engagements. So it's incredibly astounding. And you've done an impressive amount of coalition building, Dustin. And we could not be more proud and thankful as you close out your term and as we welcome our 10th Youth Observer, Cynthia Yue, who you'll meet in a little bit. But with that, Dustin, I'll turn it over to you now.
Barry, you're going to make me choked up. This is such a wonderful way to end my term. This is going to be 284, Farah, so I appreciate you shouting that out. It has just been such a pleasure connecting with young people through this role. Thank you for that kind introduction and a warm welcome to this GEOS event. As Farah mentioned, my name is Dustin Liu. I use he, his pronouns. I'm calling in from Boston, Massachusetts, on the ancestral unceded land of the Massachusetts people. And it's hard to believe that this is my last event as the 9th U.S. Youth Observer to the United Nations. And after an unprecedented virtual year and after hundreds of screenshots on Zoom, I Zoom here in front of you with, just so much gratitude for the opportunity to work with the UNA USA community and countless other community partners. So before I begin my really brief remarks, I just want to take a moment and just name that we are very much still in a global pandemic and to acknowledge that there are events happening all around the world that may be impacting our well-being. So I want to start there with deep intentions that you and your loved ones are taking care and staying safe, those stateside and beyond. The hope that I carry amidst what feels like a really challenging moment comes from the opportunities that I've had to connect with young people during my term. And I can say confidently, after meeting with over 30,000 young people through these events, that young people aren't disengaged. Young people aren't unaware of the issues that are faced in our world. Young people are feeling paralyzed by being told to change the world with no guidance or support, overwhelmed by bureaucratic systems, shell-shocked by these apocalyptic statistics and also news headlines that color the gaps in our current world, really frustrated by the reality that when we're brought to the table, there is little follow-up. And I start there because this year was a deep act of science fiction and imagination, working towards a world that does not yet exist. We were working towards a world where we were working against and across silos and offices to coordinate deep and meaningful engagements for young people who come from a variety of experience levels. A world where we flip the script. We don't focus on keynote speakers, but we focus on keynote listeners. And this idea that youth engagement isn't just a nice to have, but a must have, where the United Nations is not just a stage, but a training ground for future world leaders, and a world where young people are not only judged by what they have done, but what they can do and will do if given the opportunity. So I want to start there because this year I've had the privilege of working with young people to mend those gaps, hosting a listening tour with over 100 small group conversations across the country, shaping my term with their insights, through 98 one-on-one Zoom conversations with young people, coaching them through their change-making journey, guiding individuals on how to connect their gifts and strengths to the critical issues that we see in our world, and over 130 workshops supporting young people where they're at, collaborating with educators to encourage young people to view these issues from a systems lens, to catalyze hope and imagination that young people bring to these critical issues and that we need young people to bring in order to meet the SDGs. And I tell all young people that I connect with that I think it's quite silly that I'm the only UNA USA Youth Observer to the United Nations, because in reality, we need hundreds and thousands of young people working as youth observers. And I share this title, I share this opportunity, I've shared this year with every single young person working on the ground who is pushing forward the important work of thinking globally while acting locally. And I want to start there because I am more than honored to pass this position on to someone who I know shares this perspective. And it is my great honor to introduce for her first UNA USA event, Miss Cynthia Yue, a Tennessee native and rising senior at GW University, George Washington University, who has been selected as the 2021-2022 UNA Youth Observer to the United Nations. And I want to start here because Cynthia brings nearly 7 years of experience as a volunteer leader at UNICEF USA and serves on their national council. And Yue has witnessed firsthand, Cynthia has firsthand witnessed the UN's life-saving work around the world and how women and children are often disproportionately affected by global challenges like COVID-19, climate change, and poverty. And with our current context, I can't think of a better person stepping into this role to uplift young voices. So Cynthia, I want to pass the floor over to you in a moment. I've just read your formal bio. I've had a chance to review your LinkedIn and your resume. I want to leave room for your human bio in today's event. What's something that's not on your bio that you think is important for our community to know about you? What's something that you think is really important to your change-making journey that you want to start your term with?
Oh, well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, Dustin. And thank you all so much for being here today at my first UNA USA event as the Youth Observer. It is so incredible to be here with y'all. And I guess to answer your question, Dustin, something that's not on my bio, I think it really is my passion for the UNA USA and its work and why I support what the UN does and everything that they do to make the world better for every single person each and every day. From my earliest days, I was exposed to inequality and inequity. My grandfather was the oldest of six children, and by the time he turned 13, he'd watched as every single one of his siblings and his mother passed away from preventable causes. Just 2 generations later, in my own family, my older sister passed away from preventable causes. And so what we see is that this is something that continues to replicate itself in this country and in every other country in the world. And that's what really moved me to concentrate on ensuring that we are making sure that this doesn't happen again, today, tomorrow, in any place in the world. And so I, like you said, I have been volunteering with UNICEF USA for about 7 years now, but I'm really excited to bring the work that I've done with UNICEF USA and other organizations. I'm excited to take the knowledge I've had being at the UNGA and the 74th UNGA and the work that I've done getting other people excited about the UNA USA's work and bring that into this role as a youth observer. And most importantly, I want to make sure that my priorities center around other young people. On my listening tour, which I'm going to embark on in the next couple of weeks, I am so excited to hear what everybody on this call and more have to say and what they think about so that they are being represented, especially as a gal coming from Tennessee and as a woman of color from Tennessee. I know what it's like to feel unheard. I know what it's like to feel like you're not being represented represented. I know what it's like to feel like you're so distant from places like the UN. And so I want to make sure that every single person, every single young person, every single voice is represented and heard at the UN and beyond.
Cynthia, I just want to thank you for a moment for sharing a part of your personal narrative. And I think it's so important for us to understand that our change-making journeys are often so connected to these moments that happen in our personal lives to allow us to understand that systems are not made for equity, and how do we change or how do we innovate in order to make that a reality? Cynthia, I want to invite you in and maybe share about a specific SDG, a specific focus that you have as a personal passion point. Tell us a little bit about the SDGs that you're passionate about. And I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about your superpower. What do you bring to those SDGs? How do you connect your strength, your gift, your skills to that particular SDG to get a sense of who you are as a change maker?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dustin. So I think that in terms of SDGs, they really are all interconnected. The Sustainable Development Goals to to really represent one is to represent all of them. So for example, one that I bring up a lot is SDG 5, which is gender equality. And I really, especially as a woman of color, that is something that has always spoken to me. My grandmother was almost the victim of foot binding just decades ago. And then even to this day, as a woman of color, I think that growing up in the South has shown me the amount of inequities that exist for women around the country and around the world. And so I want to make sure that gender equality is something that is really something that we hone in on this year. But as I said earlier, to care about one SDG really is to care about all the others. And so on the topic of gender equality, we need to address the climate crisis. We need to address zero hunger and equal access to clean and safe drinking water, because these all directly relate to helping women, because at the end of the day, it generally is women who face the greatest effects and impacts of the consequences that come out of these other SDGs. And in terms of my superpower, I think my superpower is that well, first of all, I don't think I have a superpower. I think my main superpower is just recognizing that I don't have one, and recognizing that my job is to uplift other young people. I don't think I can do it all myself. I think, Justin, you coming out of this role, you've kind of seen that it really isn't about the youth observer. The youth observer's job is to make sure that other young people recognize their superpowers. It's to make sure that other people know that they have a voice and that it matters. It's to make sure that other young people are standing up for the things they believe in, for the UNA USA and everything that has to do with it. And so, kind of like what I said earlier, I'm really excited to step into this role so I can help other young people recognize their superpowers and make sure that more people who have traditionally been underrepresented are being able to speak about the issues that they care about.
Cynthia, thank you for this last piece around how you want to frame your superpower as helping other people find their story. I hear this piece around helping others discover that their story not only should be told, but needs to be told, because young people bring important expertise on these issues that need to be at decision-making tables. And I want to tie in this piece around the SDGs to the conversations that I've had with young people throughout my term. Oftentimes, when we think about climate action, climate change, quality education, the SDGs, they can seem really massive, right? They can seem really global, and they can seem really overwhelming. And I'm curious if you can share with us an example of working locally while thinking globally. How do you make sense of the connections about the SDGs, this international framework, to the work that you see young people leading on the ground? Can you share any anecdotes of young people that you've connected with, or UNA USA members that you've met that are really leading this work?
Absolutely, Dustin. I'm just going to use climate change as an example, since that's the one you kind of mentioned. So coming from Tennessee, agriculture is such a big part of our state. It is on our state seal everywhere you go. I think about 50% of our land is farmland. It is such a big part of Tennessee's culture. And what we've seen in recent years is that climate change really is impacting Tennessee, even though it is so far inland in a landlocked state. And so I remember when I was just volunteering around my home state, we were packaging food for people who were affected by a bunch of severe weather and climate changes, severe weather impacts that had been the result of climate change. And you would walk down the street, and I remember there was this one flood in my area that just I remember even Taylor Swift held a concert to help the victims of that flood. It just, everywhere you went, there were houses that were floating all over the water. There were people who weren't able to get food for weeks. There were people who weren't even able to drive to work because the streets were just flooded with water. And that really impacted our agriculture. It impacted the way our economy worked. It impacted our people. And so through my work, I think I was 9 years old at the time, I got to meet other volunteers who were helping to rebuild the city. They were helping to clean up the different impacts that had happened as a result of the flood. And we were able to basically work together to make sure that there was change and to make sure that we were creating this more sustainable city for the future. We saw through that actual instance, number one, the impacts of climate change, and number two, what happens when we unite together to ensure that our neighbors are better off and to ensure that we are creating a sustainable city, which is also one of the SDGs, and partnering together. And it really gave this was something that was all over the news, and people saw that it was a local solution that really spoke to a global issue.
Cynthia, I really appreciate the sense of locally working on these global issues and this idea that being exposed to this early on really shaped the way in which you saw individuals making a difference on these global challenges. With the time that we have left, Cynthia, I want to pivot to a conversation around self-care. I know that a lot of the young people that I've spoken to this year talk about the burden of youth leadership. Sometimes the need to really confront these difficult issues can be really challenging. And Cynthia, I'm wondering if we can take this last question to invite you to share a person, a practice, a place that you find really nourishing as a way to remind the young people on this call, and a reminder to yourself as you embark on this role, a self-care strategy that really works for you. So inviting you to go ahead and share your self-care strategies.
Absolutely. I think for me, I am a big people person. And so whenever I just need to take care of myself, I go and speak to people that I look up to. So whether it's you or Farah, or even some people who are on this call, I interned at the DOT last summer, and a few of my incredible NITSOID supervisors are here on this call as well. Just being able to speak to my mentors, hear what they have to say, because everyone's been there. Even I myself, going through this pandemic has been such a struggle, or even just navigating how to serve as the youth observer through all this has been a very interesting journey. And so talking to people who have been there, people who know what it's like, people who can give the greatest advice, that is something that is so important to me. And I am just so grateful to have incredible mentors in my life, including you, Dustin, who have just helped me become helped bring me where I am today. And I'm just so grateful for all my friends who are on this call as well, and just everybody really.
That is, way too generous, Cynthia. I just want to thank you for your leadership. Thank you for everything that you've already done. And you've touched on a piece that really resonates with me, which is that community can thaw a lot of these frustrations or a lot of these fears that we may have, right? We can't solve or help save a burning planet with burned out people. And how do we create a community of support to make that possible? How do we create a community of change makers? And I think UNA USA has been a great example of what that community can look like, should look like, and what we can aspire to build as a movement together. So I'll go ahead and end this quick fireside chat there. Cynthia, thanks so much for letting me be a part of your first UNA USA event. I'm going to pass the hosting privileges straight over to you. I'm going to mute myself, turn myself off video, and invite you to lead us into the next part of our program. Cynthia, best of luck in your term, rooting you on.
Thank you so much, Dustin. You're the best. Bye. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for listening to my fireside chat with Dustin. Y'all got to hear some of the priorities and some of the things that I'm very passionate about this year. And just as a quick note, I am embarking on my listening tour in the next couple of weeks. And so please stay tuned on the Youth Observer and UNA USA channels to take a look at that. And you will also be able to participate on the UNA USA social media and share your priorities through there this week as well. So you've kind of heard from me, and now we want to hear from you. We are going to enter in a series of polls on this Zoom call, and we really hope to get your honest feedback. We're going to be asking about some of the things that you care about so that we can better represent you at the UNA USA, the UN, and beyond. And so the first one is going to be, how many of you have heard about the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, aka the SDGs? And this is just going to be a show of hands, so you can raise your hand virtually or leave a quick comment. All right, and the next one we're going to do is please indicate which SDG you think most represents the critical issues or priorities today in the United States. And for reference, we have displayed the SDGs here as well. And you will be able to select from the different SDGs on here. The next one is please indicate the SDG you think most represents the critical issue or priority today in the world. And I've been notified that y'all are seeing all of them at once. And so I am just going to quickly go through and talk through them. But the next one is, from your perspective, how involved have youth been in addressing the critical problems and issues facing the United States? Fifth one is, from your perspective, how involved have youth been in addressing critical problems and issues happening all over the world? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how connected do you feel to the United Nations? Now, as you'll see with some of them, we've combined a few of the SDGs for some of the questions, but other than that, we appreciate your honest feedback. And again, you can head to the UNA USA channels to continue spreading your feedback and all the priorities that you care about this week. We are just going to take one more minute and then we're going to move on to our lightning round. All right, so we have our results for number 1. We see that climate action is the greatest priority. For number 2, which is the greatest priority in the world, we have climate action at 26%. And for number 3, how involved have youth been in addressing the critical problems and issues facing the United States? The 2 highest categories are very involved and somewhat involved. For number 4, from your perspective, how involved have youth been in addressing the critical problems and issues happening all over the world? We see that almost 50% have said somewhat involved. And then for number 5, on a scale of 1 to 10, how connected do you feel to the United Nations? The most commonly selected answer was 7, which is at 18%. So, and the scale was 1 being not at all connected and 10 being very connected. So these are some good numbers. We will definitely keep these in mind as we move forward with the year to come. So thank you all for giving us your honest feedback. And with that, we are going to move on to the lightning round. And before we begin, I just want to quickly introduce some of the other incredible speakers who are here with us today and joining us on this panel. So the first one is Sophia Kianni. She is on the UN Secretary-General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Next, we have Sova. He is from the World Food Program, USA. We also have Megan Johnson, who is a public diplomacy officer on the Office of Public Affairs, Planning and Coordination in the Bureau of International Organizations. And then finally, Shubhi Sinha, who is on the UNICEF USA National Council. So welcome everybody. I am so excited to be here with y'all today. And we are just going to do a lightning round question based on that poll. And so everyone will have exactly 2 minutes to speak an answer on this poll. And so I'm going to read it off. Based on the results of the poll, please respond with how your organization seeks to address these challenges and work to empower youth while connecting the US with the UN. And let's just start with Sophia.
Well, I think that this poll clearly demonstrated that people really feel inspired to take climate action, and that's exactly what Climate Cardinals is all about. What we do is we translate climate information into over 100 languages so that everyone, even from underrepresented populations, they have access to climate education and information that they need to be able to go out and make a difference and to make alterations to their personal consumption, and also to learn how they can put pressure on elected officials to take action. I was really inspired to create Climate Cardinals because I realized that there was a lack of information available in Farsi, which is my relative's native language. And so because of that, I realized that it's so critical for everyone across the world, regardless of the language they speak, to be able to take action on climate change, because I think it really is the defining issue of our lifetime.
Wonderful. That is so inspiring, Sophia. You are such an amazing change maker, and I think Climate Cardinals is such an incredible group. So thank you so much. And then moving on to Chase.
Great. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me. It's so wonderful to meet you, Cynthia, as well. And Dustin, I really enjoyed the fireside chat. Sometimes I think coming to these sorts of events, is super invigorating for someone like me who does this day in and day out and working on our very specific niche issues. And this is a sort of energizing moment that I need in my own career, and that I think we should all be making space for. So thank you for that. I work for the United Nations World Food Program, USA, which is a nonprofit organization that is associated with the UN World Food Program. We tend to manage things here in the US market, from private sector fundraising to advocacy and work up on Capitol Hill. WPUSA has been around for 15, 20 years. It's an organization that is really dedicating to getting Americans involved and supporting the mission of the World Food Program. And so that we do that, generally the office is based in Washington, D.C., but we work in markets all across the U.S. As I was looking at the poll, I was a little surprised to see a little underrepresentation there in the hunger numbers, not seeing a lot of people honing in on SDG 2. But the point here is that these things are all interrelated. And if you're concerned with climate, you're concerned with food security. The agriculture sector is responsible for about 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. If you are caring about that problem, you are inherently caring about the problem of hunger. So I think there's a lot of interplay between these SDG 2s, all these the Sustainable Development Goals. There are one thing I want to flag for you is that I think part of our mission too is to get people all across the U.S. involved in the mission of the World Food Program. And part of that is sort of recognizing the legacy of American leadership when it comes to the World Food Program specifically. Now, this is an organization that sort of got its vision back in the era of Eisenhower. It was brought to life by President Kennedy. There have been folks from both sides of the aisle and chambers up on Capitol Hill who have cared about this organization for years. And since the 90s, it's an organization that has been led by an American without interruption. So the World Food Program, the UN World Food Program, is as American as apple pie. And this is something that all of us, I think, can really take great pride in. So that's what we do at the World Food Program USA. I'll leave it there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chase. And then moving on to Shubi, 2 minutes to kind of discuss what you think.
Yeah, so I'm representing UNICEF, and if you guys don't know, UNICEF is a UN agency, and we work in 190 countries and territories. Our focus is children and women, and UNICEF has actually saved more children's lives than any other humanitarian organization. We focus on child health, nutrition, HIV and AIDS, and climate change is one of our big focuses and impact, obviously, because we always say children, they are the least responsible for climate change, but they have, they bear the greatest burden from its impact and in the future generations. So we really focus on making sure that on the advocacy front, UNICEF has worked with governments, they work directly with partners to make sure that children are at the table and they're an essential part of the conversation of climate change and those disaster response plans and everything that's related to the consequences of climate change. And, on the ground, we have workers that are working during disaster relief, we see these extreme weather events that have happened, and they're really threatening not only to destroy infrastructure, but also just children's lives in general. Floods destroy, sanitation facilities and water facilities, but they also cause diseases like cholera, which UNICEF is directly leading the charge in preventing. So we also procure medicine that is like directly being impacted by climate change. So on every different front, UNICEF has really focused on the consequences of climate change, and yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Shubi. And then last but not least, we have Megan.
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm very happy to be here today and appreciate everyone's time. And I would just like to echo what Chase said. I work at the State Department, and we are often sitting behind computers, and we are not as engaged as some of you all are in these issues on the front lines. And so it's really, really invigorating to hear your voices and to hear what you're doing. The State Department. We have Special Envoy Kerry, who's been appointed by President Biden, who handles this issue. So I think that's a big leap forward in making sure that climate is a top priority. I think we're seeing that throughout the Biden administration. And so that's kind of the big, 30,000 foot view in terms of, we have someone who's paying attention to these issues and who's traveling around the world and trying to, drum up support for some of our policy priorities and making sure that we're all aware of what's going on. I think then on the ground a little bit more, our embassies and consulates across the world are aware of these issues. They do both proactive and reactive work on climate change, which I think is huge. And so, reactively, when there are floods, when there are natural disasters, we have folks who, deliver aid, who deliver food aid, who pay attention to folks, who provide resources for those who maybe have been displaced or who are impacted, immediately in the aftermath of an event. But proactively, I'll say that we also have an office that pays a lot of attention to climate change and does little things like raise awareness in countries. So I spent some time in a country where we helped that government install air quality monitors. And it was a really big win to understand what was happening to the air quality and what that means. And then again, that links, of course, to the rest of the SDGs in terms of being able to have a healthy body, to get good access to education and to focus in school, and understanding what the impacts of climate and air quality means to getting good food and nutritious food. So I think there's hopefully that's a little bit of an answer to a very big question. So thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Megan. We're now going to move on to just the regular Q&A period, and we are actually going to go in reverse order. So flipping it back to you, Megan, why is it so important that American youth play an active role in ensuring a strong relationship between the United States and the United Nations?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And for those of you who are attending, we did receive these questions in advance, and I spent some time really thinking about what this looks like and why is it so important. And so, I think that, the bottom line is that it's important for American youth to play an active role in ensuring a strong relationship between the US and UN, because youth engagement now equals a stronger world later, and we need that. And so, youth are the future. And so figuring out how we can foster global-minded citizens who engage on important issues now means that we'll have better outcomes in the world. And in our nation's history, we've seen time and time again how youth can rally to advocate for change at the local and statewide level. And it feels more and more like that's happening at the international level as well, which is really a nice nice evolution to see. The United States, we have the basic fundamental values of freedom and democracy that I think we talk about a lot and that are at the core of the United Nations. And so young people being able to engage and connect with youth in policy issues that previous generations could not. It's now the information's at the touch of your fingertips, and previous generations haven't always had access to that kind of information to understand how to advance our core values. Given the importance of preserving these values across the world, and the fact that there are U.S. youth who are engaged at the United Nations. And I think the last reason that this is so important is simply because US youth in America can, and youth in other countries cannot. And sometimes it's because they're not able to, and sometimes it's because they're not afforded the same opportunities. But Americans have the power that other countries don't. And I believe wholeheartedly that we have a responsibility to use our privilege to shape a better world, especially in these historic times. I believe that we have a duty to help create a better world. And I think that can be done in a myriad of ways. And I think spending more time engaging with youth and listening to youth in America is one of the best ways that we can engage and ensure that there's a strong relationship between the US and the UN.
So well said, Megan. Thank you so much. And thank you for touching on how important it is to empower other young people. Moving on to Shubi, can you please elaborate on how COVID-19 has impacted youth advocacy, and how have you or UNICEF supporters adapted to getting young people engaged in a virtual setting?
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. So to talk a little bit about the young people that we are engaging, so UNICEF USA has an incredible clubs program where we have over 900 high school and college clubs in the US and thousands of student volunteers and advocates that really are piloting and leading in advocacy, education, and fundraising initiatives across the country. So those are our student advocates that are fundraising on behalf of UNICEF's programmatic work globally. They're educating people about policies, emergencies, and disasters, and they're really on the ground influencing legislation for sustainable impact in the US. So we really do focus on the think globally and act locally with UNICEF USA. And in the last 2 years, through the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement and the AAPI movement, we've really seen young people be at the forefront of advocacy-driven initiatives, even in a virtual setting. So we were pretty worried about how to engage young people virtually when schools were shut down, but surprisingly, we haven't really had to work that hard on empowering these young leaders because they're working in their communities and they're working on the ground and they're seeing their impact kind of, come to fruition in their own communities. So we've been hosting leadership webinars that train club members. We've met with congressional representatives and senators virtually instead of in person and lobbied for legislations. We have shared advocacy actions through social media campaigns that have been incredibly successful. And we've just provided our young advocates the proper tools that they need to go back home, build connections, and improve the civic engagement in their own communities. So we've seen more virtual engagement action from young people to create that intergenerational dialogue and to speak out online and offline, which has been really exciting.
Shubi, that is absolutely incredible. It has been such an honor kind of seeing all the work that you've been doing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then moving on to Chase, in your opinion, how have issues like hunger and food insecurity around the world touched American youth? Do you think that these challenges have inspired youth today to serve as activists?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I should just emphasize as well to just sort of take on Shubi's coattails here. I mean, it's so proud to work alongside of UNICEF USA and other partners up on Capitol Hill. So when you guys are up there and you're in front of members of Congress and senators and House of Representatives, those are really meaningful engagement opportunities, and I think they have a lasting sort of memory with members and staff. And so I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing on that front, especially during this pandemic, which has made that sort of work all the much more difficult. One thing I wanted to do in answering this question, Cynthia, is sort of just reflect on my own experience in this space and what motivated me to get involved in the food security space to begin with. And this is an especially difficult weekend because here we are, if you're all following the headlines, of course, you're seeing news of an earthquake, a tremendous earthquake in Haiti, 7.0 that hit sort of in the peninsula southwest in the island. My introduction to the problem of hunger was in 2009 and 2010 when a very similar event happened in Haiti. A 7.2 magnitude earthquake hit Port-au-Prince, destroying most of the city. And I remember at that point, I was with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. I was in my early 20s and it was really my first job. And I remember looking around in the aftermath of that and feeling so much anger and frustration and a really sense of urgency to try to do something about the sort of food security impacts that were inevitably going to result from that earthquake. And I kind of looked to my left and I looked to my right and said, you know, someone was going to do something about this. And I realized it was me. I mean, like, this is something that I could dedicate my life to. It's something that I could dedicate my career to. And so this has been a really powerful weekend in a lot of ways. And it's a very tragic weekend for the people of Haiti. You know, we've got folks on the ground at the World Food Program who are sort of assessing the food security impacts of this and bringing in logistical response to be able to kind of serve as the backbone for the broader humanitarian response that's going to happen there. So Haiti is top of mind for me. But I mean, listen, I think that over the years, there is increasing awareness in the United States around the problem of hunger, and especially among youth. I mean, we have plenty, of course, of hunger happening here domestically. There's some 50 million people who are food insecure in our own nation. Now, there is something, though, I think that is happening with this generation that is fundamentally different. I mean, this generation is really focused on questions of justice and equity, and there's a really enlightened worldview that seems to be prevailing, right? And hunger is almost always something that is affecting the most vulnerable populations, especially young people. So today, as you kind of look across the landscape of hunger globally, we've got at least 800 million people who are suffering from chronic hunger. We have 41 million people who are facing famine in this very moment. And we are facing the prospect of truly intergenerational losses, the loss of entire generation of the next group of leaders from across these nations, wiped off the face of the earth in the 21st century by something as simple as hunger, right? And here we are, and I think this is what young people are increasingly recognizing, is that, you know, hunger really is one of those great solvable problems, right? We've been on this planet, human beings, for 200,000 years, and this may be the first generation in human history capable of watching hunger stop, right? This isn't a question of technology anymore. We have that. This isn't a question of humanitarian intervention. We are good at that. This is really a question of political will. It's a question of, what are we going to believe in morally? Can we see that this is economically beneficial? Can we see that this is good for national security reasons? And I think this generation of young people are really starting to understand that sort of dynamic around the problem of hunger globally. So I have a lot of faith that the sort of next great champions for eliminating hunger in SDG 2 are going to come right here from home.
That is incredible, Chase. Thank you so much for putting your faith in young people and for being so open and honest about why you're passionate about working with the World Food Program. And then finally, Sophia, so the IPCC report just came out last week with scientific evidence unequivocally stating that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. What role do you think American youth can help play to mitigate the dire consequences to human influence on climate?
I think that there are so many things that young people, especially young people in the US, can do to raise awareness and to drive education about the issue of climate change. A few years ago, this study found that about over 40% of adults in the world didn't even know what climate change was, which is very startling. And so you can see that young people, we've had access to better education. Our school systems are finally instilling in us why climate change is so drastic and why we really need to combat this issue. And so especially for young people who can't vote yet, I think that for each and every single one of us, the most powerful thing we can do is vote. We can go vote for a climate-friendly candidate, because at the end of the day, I mean, you see that 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. So this isn't a matter of me cutting out all flying out of my lifestyle or something like that. This is really a matter of these companies need to be adjusting the way that they're operating. And so the only way that we can see that happen is through legislative action. And so I think that young people will, they can go vote, but they can also drive out the vote. Young people really helped to elect Biden into office because we wanted to see these progressive climate policies come into action. And so I think that for young people to continue to work with grassroots organizations, to start their own nonprofits in my case, and to engage with the UN actively, these are all steps that we can take to drive up public enthusiasm and awareness of climate change. I mean, you saw that just 2 years ago, we were able to organize the hugest climate march ever seen, where we had over like 4 million people turn out into the streets and strike. And I think that continuing to drum up that enthusiasm, continuing to instill in the public that this is a crisis that needs to be addressed, by taking those steps, we can really pressure our elected officials into taking action.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sophia. And I totally agree. Young people have led so many of our most influential movements in the past 10 years. And then just finally, an open question for everybody. What are your agency's priorities for young people in the next year? And I guess we can just mix it up a little bit and start with Shubi.
Yeah, in the next year, UNICEF, we really want to focus on the CRC, the Conventions on the Rights of the Child, getting that ratified by every country. The US has not ratified it, which is really, really important for us to work kind of on the ground and work with legislators. Like Sophia said, this is kind of a policymaking decision that has to be made, and young people are, you know, at the forefront of that. So we have a lot of advocacy work to be done, and with the climate crisis, the impending consequences of that is outside of advocacy, is putting pressure on businesses and corporations, and, you know, really speaking out in our communities, but also being vocal on social media. We've kind of seen how social media has catalyzed a lot of the change. And, you know, young people are great at mobilizing online. So I think that is a great tool for us, and oftentimes a free tool for us to get more numbers behind a cause. So I think that that's something that UNICEF is really hoping to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shubi. And do you want to drop UNICEF USA's tags?
Yes, of course. You guys can follow UNICEF USA and UNICEF Clubs, all lowercase, on Instagram to see all the work that we're going to do. Thanks, Cynthia.
Amazing. Thank you, Shubi. And next we're going to move to Chase.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, we've got a really good sort of milestone out there in the UN Food System Summit right now to sort of highlight what major issues are on the youth agenda in coming year as it relates to food security. And I think what we're hearing out of those conversations as it relates to food security and global food security, I mean, there are really three big issues that have come up. One is climate change. And I talked a little bit, of course, about the ways that food systems contribute to the climate problem. But of course, for a lot of smallholder farmers around the world, those rain-fed systems are really intimately impacted by changes in climate change and an increase in frequency and magnitude of extreme climate-related extreme events. So that's kind of one issue. The second is moving towards a type of agricultural production and food production that is good for both people and planet alike, and reducing food loss and waste. This is a major issue globally. It's one top of mind among young people in the United States and globally as it relates to the food system. And then, of course, there's this bigger question about getting young people interested in farming and agricultural systems. Again, a lot in developing countries, we're seeing sort of disengagement from agricultural production. I think there is a movement here in the United States to get youth more involved and looking at succession planning from existing farms to try to get people involved and on the land. But I think those kind of three bundles of issues are going to be top of mind for the World Food Program and World Food Program USA in the coming years. But I encourage you all to follow that conversation. In late September, of course, we're going to see sort of next iteration of the UN Food Systems Summit. And then there's also a World Food Forum that is happening in the first week of October, where you're also going to see youth really engaged in issues around global food security. In the meantime, to do a similar plug here, if you want to get interested or you want to follow a little bit more about what the World Food Program is doing internationally, you can visit us at wfpusa.org and click the Get Involved link. And when you go there, you're going to see a whole bunch of resources, a couple apps that you can do and download to your phone, including Share the Meal and Free Rice. But it also is an opportunity for you to sign up as a Zero Hunger champion. And if you do that, we're going to be sending you a whole bunch of social media content that you can be posting across your networks, and then just general updates on WFP programming around the world. So let me leave it there, and that's my plug to you.
Perfect, Chase. And then we're moving on to, let's do Megan.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to answer that question both domestically and internationally, if it's okay. So domestically, there are a couple programs that we support. So there's Diplomats in Residence and Hometown Diplomats. And what these programs are folks who come back from their tours overseas that want to go speak college campuses, at high schools, back in their hometowns to talk a little bit about what the State Department does. I think that's a huge opportunity for us to engage with youth. It's a little bit different during the COVID times, but I think at some point it'll bounce back and things will probably be in person again. And just to talk a little bit about what is happening on the world stage and how youth can get engaged and what that looks like, as well as career opportunities for folks in parts of our country that may not be paying attention to some of these issues the same way that, you know, is happening here in Washington, D.C. And then on the international stage, we're actually just making some changes to how we work with audiences overseas. And one of the things that our embassies will be doing in the next couple of years is working with emerging voices. And so, you know, as Twitter becomes more prominent, as social media takes hold in some countries where it hasn't necessarily taken hold just yet, there are ways that we're looking at who the emerging voices are and how we're engaging them and how we're speaking to them. So both a little bit of a domestic and an international lens for that question.
I love hearing that. Thank you so much, Megan. And then finally, last but not least, we have Sophia.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm super encouraged by everything you guys are doing with your organizations. And for me, both with the UN Youth Advisory Group on climate change and with Climate Cardinals, I think there are many different opportunities for young people to get involved. Specifically for Climate Cardinals, I mean, we have really built up to over 8,000 volunteers in 41 countries, primarily all of which are young people. I think the average age of our volunteers last time I checked was just 16 years old. And so I think that shows you how much young people care and how much they want to make a difference just by taking advantage of the fact that they might be bilingual and they might be able to translate information into a language where they can help more people to learn about it. And then on the social media front, I definitely think that it is such an easy and accessible step for people to take to post about climate change, to post about what's happening, and to urge their followers to take action in like some sort of manner. I know that Climate Cardinals on TikTok, we've been able to reach hundreds of thousands of people with our like silly little videos, like just talking about climate change or inviting people to volunteer. And I think that that's definitely something that anyone can do. And then with the UN Youth Advisory Group, I think that one thing we've been doing that I really think is very valuable is we've been holding these consultations with young people in over 20 countries. And so we've been quizzing them on what are their climate priorities, what do they want to see from world leaders, and then we actually synthesized all those findings into a report, and we had like 6 key actions that young people in all these countries want their world leaders to take. And we're going to continue to do those consultations. So another plug, I guess, on Twitter, you can follow us at YAG Climate, YAG Climate. And so we will definitely be posting about other opportunities to attend a consultation, to apply to attend. And then we will use your advice and your wisdom to form these documents and reports that we're really presenting to the UN Secretary-General and to other decision makers within the UN that can actually make your visions come to fruition.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's amazing hearing about how you're synthesizing what young people care about and sending them up to the UN. That is something that I hope to do with my role as the youth observer, just in general for all the SDGs. And so kind of just another plug for the Youth Observer listening tour. I am so excited to hear all of y'all's thoughts, and I invite everybody to join the listening tour so you can discuss everything that you care about and want to be represented this year. And as well, just another plug, please follow the UNA USA's accounts and the Youth Observer's account, which is US Youth Observer on all platforms. And now I'm going to pass the mic over to Farah for the open Q&A from the audience.
Yes, and what an inspiring group, I must say. So thank you. I know we peppered you with a lot of questions, and unfortunately, we have a very limited time for Q&A. However, we do have our informal opportunity immediately following this session if your question does not get answered. If you are willing and able to raise your hand and to ask your question verbally, please go ahead and raise your hand, and please make sure that your question has a question mark, so it is indeed an actual question. And in the meantime, there is one from written down in the Q&A box, and this is for everyone actually to weigh in. And although you had each of you had mentioned at some form about how high school school and college students can get engaged. Are there any more specifics as far as connecting people and their community with SDGs and your organization for which you represent? So I may just, if I could just direct that to Shubi to start, if you have anything to add about UNICEF USA.
Yeah, so our main program is for just interacting with high school and college chapters. So if you go to high school or college, you can start a UNICEF club or a chapter at your campus. And so we will provide you the entire toolkit that you need to kind of mobilize in your own community. And we've seen that that's been the most successful, is just letting the young people kind of lead charge back home and just giving them all the resources that they need to succeed and speak out on what they're passionate about. So that's definitely our main way of engaging young people.
Great. Chase, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think what I would do, Farah, is we have not as robust of a college and high school network as UNICEF USA, but it's something that's growing at WFP USA. For now, if folks head over to WFPUSA.org and they sign on to our mailing list, you can sign on for an advocacy portion of that as well, and start getting updates on ways to get involved with your members of Congress and weigh in on certain campaigns that we're starting to run monthly. So I think that's probably the easiest way. And then, of course, if you end up going onto the website, you download the Share the Meal app. The Share the Meal app is this opportunity for you to be able to, with a click of a button, provide 80 cents, which is what the cost of feeding a child for a day, provide 80 cents to the Mission of the World Food Program, choosing a campaign of your choice. You can also team up in that Share the Meal app and sort of create your own groups and compete against others. That's a really great way to get involved. There's a really neat interface with social media there, where when you are sharing the meal and you're sitting down for a meal and you choose to share that for 80 cents, you can take a photo of the meal that you're having, stick it up on social media, and it's kind of an opportunity for you to share that experience with somebody else. So I would say the sort of advocacy list, getting involved in that front, and then Share the Meal is a really easy way to get involved in a really vibrant network.
Fantastic. And Megan, do you have any more specifics than what you had already mentioned?
Yeah, the State Department is such a mammoth organization. Mine are going to be a little bit more passive. I would say following us on Twitter at State Dept, that's DEPT, following our Spox handle as well, are going to be good ways for youth to connect in different ways. We put out information whenever there are specific events or sessions, but that's probably the easiest way, is to follow us on Twitter.
Fantastic. And Sophia, I know you had mentioned that your sweet spot age is about 16, so it sounds like this might be your target audience. If you could add more.
Yeah, of course. So we would love any young people to go to Climate Cardinals website, climatecardinals.org, and you can sign up or apply to be a volunteer, either a volunteer translator, or you can join one of our volunteer teams like social media, research, design, to really help Climate Cardinals to continue to spread our mission of making climate education more accessible.
I think we're going to try to squeeze in one question. Monica, if you're able to unmute, please go ahead. She may not be able to. Okay, well, hopefully you can hold your question if you're able to join us, Monica, at the session after this. But I do want to squeeze in, we're talking about action, we're talking about activism and advocating. So first of all, thank you to every one of you on the screen, and also Dustin, who is not on the screen. Very incredible. There's Dustin, he's popping in for his goodbye. But many thanks, Megan Johnson, Shubhi Sinha, Chase Sova, Sophia Kianni, for representing youth priorities at your organizations. number one, for coming together to help convene this conversation. This again is something that we take very seriously at UNA USA. And I also want to say, of course, thank you to our youth observers, our outgoing youth observer, Dustin Liu, and to welcome formally our incoming youth observer, Cynthia Yue. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you on the call. You had asked what you can do to get involved. I can tell you very pointedly, please get involved with us, with the UNA USA movement. We do consider ourselves a movement. You can see here we're debuting a QR code for the first time, so hopefully we get a lot of you to use it. So we have good results that we can report out. But most of all, you see here in the photo just a slice of hopefully what we can get back to in terms of normal life. And that's folks from all states advocating on behalf of the UN. And speaking about advocating on behalf of the UN, we want to make action really, really simple for you. We have right there another fancy QR code that you are able to use and to customize a petition. And so what are you asking your members of Congress to do? You are asking your members of Congress to fully support the UN from the US's financial means of continuing UN agency support. And this is basically an opportunity for you to voice to your elected officials that you care about, you believe in, and you are inspired by the work of the UN. And with that, I am again very appreciative for everyone's time. Cynthia mentioned that she will be continuing on gathering priorities, listening to youth with her listening tour. So please do keep your eyes peeled for that. And then again, if you're able to stick around for our networking session, use the QR code. It is a different link. But most of all, thank you for being with us. And until the next time, be well and be active. Thank you so much.